Brene Brown, I don't know if you're familiar with her expression where she talked about having a vulnerability hangover. When you put yourself out there emotionally, when you just open yourself up and you're raw, and then afterwards you're like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Is that something you can relate to?
Yes, absolutely. The stress that comes between the time that you have last signed off on the manuscript and said, yes, this is it, I'm okay with it, until it rolls onto that shelf, I can't even tell you, every day gets more and more stressful, more and more stressful. But what ended up happening, because yes, absolutely, but then a wave of relief overtook me. I was so glad to have been able to tell a little more of my story and put some pieces together. And I also, perhaps we'll get to this and perhaps we won't, but my husband Keith allowed me to share a little bit of our story. And that was the part that I was most frightened of, because I was comfortable exposing myself on paper, but I didn't know how people, I just hoped that the readers were kind, and they could not have been more so. It probably is the number one thing people have responded to, is what I shared about him. And so it was stressful and a lot of anxiety, and then it was just a relief to feel like, for better or for worse, this is us. Yes.
You have talked in the past about being a victim of childhood sexual abuse. You mentioned it today.
Yes.
Thank you so much. But until the memoir, as far as I know, you had never revealed that it was your father who was the one who abused you, and that the one who was your protector had become the perpetrator.
Yes.
What made you decide now was the time, and how did you go about the process of determining how much to share?
Yes. What I try to do, and what I've tried to do for many, many years, is to be specific enough where someone understands the basic narrative that I'm trying to tell, and at the same time not so graphic that I lose their attention to the graphics, because that can happen. It's happened to me where I couldn't get over what was just told enough to even get on to the redemption of it. So it's a very, very fine line, and I'm not sure that I always stayed with it, but it was my attempt to do so. But I'll tell you what, any of you that are around my age probably understand what I'm about to say. If you have loved the Lord, however awkwardly I've done it, or however it's looked on me, however it's looked on you, I think as we get to the final chapters of our life, it's like, Lord, if there is anything left, if you think of your life as a drink offering, well, what has not yet been poured out that's worth pouring out? Some of those things are not. They're just enough to be said that I lived a good measure of my life very, very deeply in a pit. But what is left, Lord, that to pour out that offering would be of help to someone? And they're just, incest is it's a monster. It's a monster. And I wanted other men and women to know, I get it. I mean, it's a brother to sister, a sister to brother is huge. Parent to child is enormous. And I wanted to be able to say, with Jesus, and with a whole lot of help that he brought to me, he and I made it. We made it and still making it, that he really can get you through the worst.
You talk about church actually being a safe place when your home wasn't, which is all the more remarkable to me when you talk about your father being so active in the church.
Yes.
So how did your experience at home not destroy your confidence in church and secondly in God as Father?
Yes. This is something I have to give entirely to the Lord, because oddly, my siblings did not come through that the same way. Most of them have a relationship that is intact with Jesus on this side of it, but there was a lot of fallout in my own life, and the hypocrisy of it, just to watch him bounce around. And I don't know, I'd have to do it for you. And I have this, why it's called Knotted Up is because he ended his life well. Was he who he seemed to be at any point? I don't know. Only the Lord knows. But in these days when active abuse was going on, and let me say this where you can sort of read between the lines of what I'm about to say. It was not an isolated incident. I'll say that much. But the other people in my family, it's their stories to tell. So it was quite something to watch him sort of bounce around, ushering and passing the plate, and very, very confusing. But I don't know, it had to have been what the Bible would call the gift of faith, because I was a little bitty kid, Leo, in Sunday school. I still love Sunday school to this day. I can remember sitting in those little baby bear chairs, and our teacher would hold up those watercolor pictures. You've seen them, and we'd have high C, orange high C, and we'd have those little butter cookies that you could put around your little finger, and you could try to eat off the side of it like this. And I look, and she would say, "He is your very best friend." And I would and somehow the children could all crawl on him on that picture, And I don't know, I've said so oddly, I don't know what to make of it, but I believed that. And the more I entrusted to him, and my life got so ugly and so messy. And at that point, I don't know how early my abuse started, because I have total blackouts early on, total. But he just was faithful. Jesus was the one that, to this day, that was always what he said he would be, always. And so, because it was, I always, with my teachers, with my pastors, all the way through, not everyone has had that experience. A lot of people have had the opposite. Their home was safe, their church was not, but that just was not the case. And thank God, if my home wasn't going to be safe, I was glad handbell choir. I just lived my life there. Handbell choir, regular choir, missions classes, everything Sunday school, everything you can imagine. So it was dear to me. Bonnie asked me, she said, "Do you do this very often, come in and give a message like this on a Sunday morning?" I said, "I don't." And she said, "Because you're gone a lot." I said, "Actually, I'm home on Sundays. I'm a very big believer in the community of faith, and of our lives being invested in it. So it has me to the death. Even the Southern Baptists couldn't run me off. So, yeah. I say that with affection, and I mean that.
Beth, I listened to a podcast that you did with Russell Moore, and you were talking about the impact of being a victim of childhood sexual abuse when you were a little girl. You said, "I would look around me and wish I was a good little girl." She said, and then you said, what has a child done by the first or second grade to have that kind of shame? Yes. But that's how a child takes it on, the weight of it. You said, "I remember being 14 years old and feeling 80. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I can remember when things were at its worst at home, when I was growing up in under our roof, when they were just at their worst. And my mother she was in such a deep despair. And listen, did she ever earn it? But that's another story altogether. I've been asked many times, did she know? Not until later, she didn't know. But she was just very detached at a time when we needed her so badly. But my little brother, I only had one sibling that was younger. And we all grew up, when you're in a household like that, you're growing up so much faster than you're supposed to. And I can remember, because we were in such a bad way, that I would try to rub my little brother's back. You got to understand, he was 2 years younger than me. 2 years younger. I was this little a kid as he was. But I'd try to tickle his back to get him to go to sleep at night so he'd feel like, he was loved. And I remember I'd walk to my room. I was, pre-adolescent, and just go, I feel like an old person. I felt like I couldn't even hold my head up, and just trying to make the change. We lived across the street from the high school, and I would literally walk out the front door and down the steps, across the street, and up the steps of the high school, and I would have to make a change in that one little half a block's distance. I'd have to, in my mind, put on a whole different kind of facade in order to make it. Because what was happening in our home, and it was not just abuse, but my father was an adulterer. And I am telling you, in a small town, listen, if you want to live in a whole lot of sin, move to a big city. You know what I'm saying? It's just not a good place to be in, because it was just so much talk.
I think one of the reasons why it's so refreshing and helpful for you to speak so openly about your experience is just the statistics of those who have been victimized sexual abuse. And so you've already, I think, answered this question, but just before we move on to the next topic, any other advice you would have for survivors, people who might just be beginning to grapple with it? Sometimes people actually, it's so painful, they've shut it away and repressed it for decades, and then something triggers and it comes out.
Yes.
To anyone who is that would describe, what would you recommend?
One other factor that was enormous in the timing of me telling my fuller story was that we were going through a time of just unparalleled scandal in the denomination of my upbringing and my adulthood that I dearly, dearly loved, by the way, and still love. But we were seeing that it had been that these victims were just like, they were just expendable in the whole thing. It was shelter the abusers, because, man, we need to protect the church. And it was, and part of what I wanted to say is, and I say this to anyone that does not have this kind of background, and I hope that you don't, you just have no idea the impact. It could be one time for 20 minutes. That person has gone on about their life. Maybe they'll come up at some point, they're sorry, but they took your innocence away from you, and you relive it over and over again. And it's not only that, Leo, it's also that you make, when you are an abused child, you make decisions out of that. I made the world's worst relational decisions. Because, in my mind, I was lucky for anyone to even like me. Just so much shame. And so I want to say to you, no matter how much you feel it, if you have been abused and you have never sought some healing for it, it will be so tempting to think, well, it doesn't bother me. Oh, yes, it does. It comes out another way, whether in anger, whether one of the things that we'll do is form an addiction to substance, because that helps keep us numb where we won't have to deal with it. But I would say to you, even if you say, there was a woman that said, whether or not I think I need to deal with it, I really should talk to someone and be able to tell the full story, full out. And listen, we've gotten to a day, Leo, where now I'm going to say, I'm going to tell you to seek a professional therapist, especially one that's trauma-informed, because you need someone that you can be dead honest with and you can tell all the facts to exactly as colorfully as it happened. And then see where you are. But it matters. What happened to you was wrong, and it was not your fault, and it is not your shame. And I want you to be able to hold your head up and know who you are in Christ. It took someone bigger than my abuse, bigger than my dad, bigger than my own self-esteem could ever be to break the image of who I thought I was. It took the God of the universe, truly, truly.
You also share really openly about mental illness
Yes.
in your home, your mother's compromised mental health, which you described as her being, quote, chained in a cell
Yes.
that had become unbearable.
Yes.
You already alluded to it, but you speak openly about your husband Keith's PTSD from a tragic fire when he was a
Yes.
child that killed his brother and
Yes.
injured him, as well as his bipolar disorder. And you also speak about your own struggle. At times, you said there were times your husband, quote, awakened during the night and found you curled up behind a chair, disoriented and talking in half realities. Again, incredibly raw, Beth. Thank you. Why did you decide to be so transparent about mental illness in your home?
I sat down with Keith. This was the hardest part, and I don't know. I cannot stand listening to my own voice. So I assure you, I have not heard the audio version. But when I did the audio, the part that I got to, that I sobbed to the point that they had to stop the recording, and it took all of us because the 3 people from my publisher were there. They all cried. My assistant cried. I cried. And it was the part about Keith because it was like, of all the offerings I have to give you in this book, nothing is more expensive to me than me handing my husband over to your opinion. I don't know how to say that anymore. But I mean, that's my guy, and I have covered that in all its difficulty, Leo. Let me tell you something. Bipolar is something else to deal with and to also be married to. So it was quite the roller coaster. But we sat down because I'd written the childhood part and I'd gotten to the part with him. And I thought, wow, how am I going to do this? And I sat down with him and I said, I want you to think about something. I said, you're under no pressure, but I just want you to know what shall we agree? What shall we agree to tell? And I said, honey, we've done everything we could. We told about the abuse early on. We told that you'd been through the fire early on. I said, we've tried to lay our lives out there and go, if anything of our pain can be of help to you, here it is. And I said, here we are. I said, honey, we're in our 60s. I mean, what do we have to lose? What do we have to lose? And he said, I'll never forget it because he's really, really handsome, and I just love him. And the older you get, the more mutual compassion there is between the two of you. Don't you agree, Ellen? It's just like, just to even see the wrinkles on one another's hands, I just like, I just want to protect him and love him and take care of him. And I was like, why would we hold back now? And he said to me, do you have to tell all of it? I said, I don't have to tell any of it. He said, can I say what we tell and what we don't? You can say what we tell and what we don't. And he sat there for a minute and he said, okay. And when it first rolled out, this was part of my anxiety, Leo, because I watched him get anxiety. And I knew his friends were going to read about it. I knew, oh, Jesus, help us, help us, help us. And I watched him get anxious about it. He said, Elizabeth, he always calls me by my full name, Elizabeth, can I read it again? And I said, yes, but it's too late. It's out. And he said, I know that, but I want to read it again. And he read it again. He said, piece of cake. I'm good. And Leo, from Lance was one of the first people I heard from. I could start naming to you men that from the beginning, and I would just go home, and I could cry about it now, but I would go home and I would read off of Twitter, honey, these are the people that want you to know how thankful they are that you let me tell your story. Because life is hard. It is hard, and a lot of us are living with things that, behind closed doors, just these ups and downs. I'll never forget when someone said, why is it you never do deal with whatever problem it is? Because I would talk about us living with challenges, and you don't want to go, come closer so I can punch you in the nose, because it's like, this doesn't fix. It didn't for us. We had to learn how to live with it and how to manage it. And so, I just want people to know, I get it. I get it. And it's hard. But man, does God love you. And man, will he be of help to you.
Thank you. I did listen to the audio of your memoir, and it's exceptional, but what is especially, I think, endearing is the first, third of it, where you're talking about your childhood in Arkadelphia. You adapt your voice back to the way you and others would have spoken at that time in Arkadelphia. Fantastic.
I'm so
really,
glad.
really cool.
I was so afraid it was going to be annoying, but I told my publisher, I said, I can't be true to it. I can't act sophisticated and use my Arkansas slang. So I said, I'm going to have to go back and I'm going to have to talk that way. So I say at the beginning of the audio, listen, prepare yourself. And I said, so it will get better to some of you, and to others of you, it will get worse. So.
Spot on. Just to one more emphasis on mental illness. I think one of the reasons it's so important that you're speaking so openly about it is because oftentimes Christians and Christian faith communities don't, and even go to the point of shaming people who are struggling with their mental health. You say life can be mean, mental illness is mean, it can be heartless to the one it needles and harasses, and hateful to the ones nearby. Mental illness may be a lot of things, but there is at least one thing it is not. It is not someone's fault.
That's correct.
And when I read that, I thought, that's someone who is attuned to having been in a lot of different Christian communities and gotten a lot of unsolicited feedback, most likely, over time. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Why do you think I didn't tell it? Just to protect my husband and protect myself and my family from all the things that people were going to say, like it's demonic, that there's still, I just saw a clip of someone just here recently teaching that there was just basically no such thing, that it was all the work of the devil, and you just cast that out and you're good to go, and you don't ever turn to medication. I just want to go, are you a nut? I honestly want to go, you have the worst mental illness of all of us. But I don't, well, yes, I have done that a few times. I can't say I haven't. I actually have done that. But it was huge, because that's what they're going to say. And you just look at things. I'm going to tell you, we bless the Lord with everything in us, that we have a protocol that we go by. And it's a medical protocol. It's also sort of a social protocol, so to speak. We know how we most flourish. And I'm so thankful for it. So, you got to just close your ears to some of that stupidity. You just have to.
Very wise. You say some really profound things about family. One of my favorite quotes in the memoir is this: family is a heck of a thing, fierce and frightful. There we are, all zipped up inside the unknown together.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Especially when you're in an extremely malfunctioning family. The dynamics between all the siblings. We were a 3-generation family, so it was, thank God we were. It was my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, my parents, and then my 4 siblings and me. And you're all trying to deal with this set of circumstances that no one sees from exactly the same way, and you don't even know. Like, one of my siblings and I didn't even speak. That sibling never had told anyone anything that had ever happened. until I told it about myself. And so we were long into adulthood by the time that we talked about it sibling to sibling. So all of this and all of this mess and this is one of the ways I could really relate to Hagar in wanting to run away, but exactly where were we to go? It was absolutely terrifying. And also, this is another reason why I advocate for the abused, because the repercussions are such that there are just lots and lots of, there's the abuse, but then there are lots and lots of the results of it that play out in all sorts of ways, and relationally, socially, religiously, whatever it may be. And so, we all made lots of mistakes in lots of different ways, and then just trying to deal with it as differently as we all did. Some of us we went the direction of very serious addiction, very, very serious. And some of us have been in and out of jail, lots of rehab. And again, I'll say, we earned it, but it's something to be that trapped in the same place, and 8 people are dealing with it 8 different ways. Some not dealing with it at all.
All zipped up in the unknown together. You also say, along the same lines, we want to be known, but not memorized, as if we cannot change. Family has a way of freezing its constituents in time.
Yes.
Can you talk more about that? And because I'm sure most of us can identify with
this sibling thing, wouldn't you agree? Just here recently, 7 months ago, I lost my dearest sibling, my kindred, just dropped dead of a heart attack, my big brother. And when I loved what one of the men that interviewed me for a radio program said to me. He said, Beth, he said, I've got to say that I'm so glad you told the story about your brother before he passed away, because he said you didn't write from sentimentality, you wrote from accuracy, because I would have written differently had he died, because I would have just gushed. But he very much is in play in it. And I think the whole sibling dynamic, it's so important to us. And some of you have siblings you haven't talked to in years. You have others that you don't know how you would ever live without. And some of those all under the same roof. Like this is one sibling, this is another. But I do think one thing we tend to do with our siblings, especially, he and I went a more sober route and a more creative route. But I think the thing that we do with one another that dealt with it different ways is that we just tend to freeze each other in time. Like that's who we always were. And one of the things I suggest in that chapter is that we think we know each other well, but sometimes it's our siblings we realize down the road we know the least of all, because we just let them freeze way back then, and we don't accept who they've become. And what is it? How do you feel? What does life look like to you as an adult? All these dynamics. There are so many things that I would trade out of my life, so many things. But I'm so glad I don't have the opportunity to do that, and I bet many of you feel the same way, because those are the things. If life has any riches to me now at all, and meaning and texture and depth, it was all of those things, all the unknown and all the mess of it. I've told Jesus so many times, listen, if I can just survive this calling that you've given me, I'm going to say it was a really good idea. But, some days you don't think you're going to. But at the end of it all, I've had such a blast with him. I really I have lived such an adventure. I truly have.
Thank you, Beth. Let's talk a little bit about spiritual life. And I think one of the things you don't do is you don't speak sentimental, pious platitudes. Like I think a lot of people experience with Christian teachers or faith communities, and it makes it virtually impossible to be honest about your own struggles because the bar is so high, you're always just trying to struggle to get there. One of the things that you say is, there would be no arriving, just pursuing. Yes. It wasn't so much 3 steps forward and 2 steps back as it was 10,000 steps in circles and cycles. That's brilliant. Yes. I would wonder if it was still considered hypocrisy if the person I pretended to be was the person I deeply wanted to be. Yes. Wow.
I still don't know the answer to that question. And in some ways I think that's fair game. Trying to live into that. Yes. Trying to live into that as much. This is who I want to be. This is who I don't really think it's fair game. I don't like hypocrisy. But the person that I was putting out there was the person that I wanted very much to be. I say in the book, I couldn't decide whether I was a good girl doing bad things or a bad girl doing good things. I never did know. It was just according to the hour, according to the day. But about the platitudes, I'm going to tell you, I'd have used all of them. I got to talk to a gentleman earlier that I would have known at church many, many years ago. I'd have used all of them. And then life just beats the crap out of you. I bet I wasn't supposed to say that.
No, that's safe here for sure.
So, you get over some of that.
But I do think you being able to speak that way, it's like it gives oxygen into the room for people who are very much in process, because we all are, who find themselves to be a far greater mess than they'd like to admit, yes, because we all are.
Yes.
And it also, I think, takes, and maybe this is most important, it takes the spotlight off of ourselves, ironically, because we become totally dependent on
yes,
the perfection, holiness, goodness, and grace
yes,
of God in Christ.
Yes.
So it accomplishes many things simultaneously. Thank you for doing that. One of the things you can comment on if you want, is another one of those great statements in your memoir. You said, I was about to get to start over. I think this is when you were moving to Houston.
Yes.
Mind you, for those who've lived past the 3rd grade, there's no real starting over from scratch. There's just starting over scratched. Yeah. That's brilliant. That will be quoted in a future sermon here at City Church.
There was that old movie, Steel Magnolias, and one of them says to the other, well, it's the Dolly Parton person in it, and she says, if you're 14, you're old enough to have a past. I had a past way before then. So yeah, you just I always wish, what would it have been like just to honestly start over from scratch? But I think that you get older and go, I don't think that was the point. Now, yes, spiritually speaking, we're made new creations, of course. But I don't know. I think that that's part of our story and part of our song.
There's so much we could talk about there. I want to leave plenty of room to talk about women in ministry, your ministry. So you've faced extraordinary pressure throughout your ministry as a woman teaching the Bible in a largely conservative Christian world, pressure to be, quote, under a man's authority, careful never to usurp that authority, pressure to have a story of marital wholeness, lest your ministry would be invalidated. You said, quote, I was never blind to varying degrees of sexism in our church culture, but I accepted it. Women like me played by the rules, or we were off the court.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I'm going to tell you because I've been asked so many times, why did you do it? And I will say again and again, it was the only way to do what I was called to do. Are you kidding me? In the world that I was in, these were the rules. And I'll say this is going to be so bizarre to so many of you, but I know no other way to put it. In my thinking, there was not a world outside my world. The evangelical world that I served in, I would have thought that the believing world outside of that would have interest in Bible study, it would have been this big. Of course, I was wrong. It took being in this situation to realize there is life out there. But you don't think it from the inside because we were raised to believe. I say this, you've got to know, again, how knotted up all of this is because I would not trade off my heritage for anything. But in my part of the world, we were taught that not only were we right, there were some others that were right as well, but we were the rightest of the right. So no one was righter than us, so where was I going to go? Because I would only want to get righter. Well, we were as right as we got. And so I did not question those things. I just did. And what got me, and I'll not drag all of this out because it's too long a story anyway, but the overwhelming feeling that hit me in 2016 while I was watching my peers, you have to understand, this was my age group. Some of these were men I'd worn flats around so I would not be taller than them. I had done everything. I had deferred and deferred and deferred. And suddenly, no big deal what was going on. No big deal about the Access Hollywood tapes. No big deal, just a baby Christian. And I don't want to argue Trump with you. I know you're going to find this hard to believe. This wasn't about Trump to me. I expected Trump to be exactly what he was. I did not expect us to be what we were. You cannot know, I cannot find the verbiage to tell you how shocking I found it. Just shocking. And what I felt like I wanted to say and did, I played by your rules and you lied. I submitted underneath it to the point of ridiculousness. I look back at some of the things that I would say and how I would constantly, if I was on a team of speakers and they were men and I was the only woman, how I would constantly, in my message, I would defer, like I learned from you. I had learned from all of them, but I look back on this whole way of doing this and I thought, I did this because I believed you were in it for the scriptures. Even if I thought it felt bizarre to me, and I thought, this feels weird to me. It felt disrespectful to me. But I want to be a woman of the word. I've said so many times, I did not ever resent, still to this day, never resented being taught 1 Timothy chapter 2, never. What I resent is that it was all that was ever taught. There was never any egalitarian had a low view of Scripture. And it's not true. It's not true. Now, you can be on whatever side of that aisle you find to be sound, but what we do know is that there are scholars all over the map on those issues, and there are biblical reasons why they're there. So it could not have affected me more. I won't speak for Russell, but it's how we got to be friends because it was so mind-blowing and there were so many few people.
Russell Moore.
Yes. Oh, my Lord.
No relation.
No. I always like to say he's my son, but he's not. He's not. But, we didn't even like each other. We couldn't have been further on the Southern Baptist spectrum. Two leaders could not have been at further extremes from one another. So you talk about unusual friends, but it was perilous. Have you ever had fog clear and known as it was clearing, this is not going to be good. This is not going to be good. This is not going to be good. That if you could have pulled the fog back in that you knew, oh no, because it was going to unravel. And of course it did. It did. And I have so many friends, so many peers that I respect in that world, but it was high enough up and seminary related enough. I mean, from so high at the top of it, and got more and more. I felt like it was pulling further and further into hyper-fundamentalism and further and further. I was used to sexism, but it was not until I got out in the larger world that I ran into full throttle misogyny. And I thought, you don't like women. And the most shocking part of it is it was not only the men who did not like women. I'll not say much more about that. But there's nothing scarier than a woman who is a misogynist. That's all I'm going to say to you.
Talk about scholars being all over the map on this. Having you preach here, which is just a delight beyond description for me, represents significant evolution in my own experience. I think it's now about maybe 12 years ago, I was sitting down with Gordon Fee, if you know who Gordon Fee is.
He is one of my favorite. I don't know him personally, but I've studied
Let's fist pump Gordon Fee.
under him over and over and over.
One of the premier New Testament scholars in the
Yes.
world, went to be with the Lord about a year ago, I
Yes.
think. But I was talking to him about this because I had growing my views that used to be very complementarian, that women did not teach in mixed gender audiences and so forth, have authority over men. I used to have that position, but I found that position weakening. And so I went to Gordon, and he said, what you may want to consider is your starting point. He's brilliant on how to interpret the Bible.
Yes.
What your starting point is. He said, conservatives on this tend to take 1 Timothy and maybe one murky passage from 1 Corinthians because they seem to be very limiting passages. And that becomes your eye of the needle, everything, your filter, everything now in the entire Bible, all 66 books now is read through that filter.
Yes.
He said, that doesn't make any sense. What if you took a more important moment, say the birthday of the church, Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost, where Peter, delivering the first Christian sermon of all the texts he could have chosen in the entire Bible, chooses Joel chapter 2 and reiterates multiple times, indicative of the new age of the Spirit, is that both sons and daughters will prophesy.
Yes.
And he said, if that becomes your point of departure, and then asking the question, he says, he is convinced, he said, that the Spirit did not distribute gifts with gender specificity. So all the gifts that are given to men are given to women. And that was just mind-blowing for me. That all of a sudden at that point, an entire world started opening up to me. I am so glad you are where you are. One of the reasons being that I think men need to hear more of what we heard today in your powerful delivery of the word. So thank you for your courage in this.
Thank you. I want to say one thing to you. I'm hoping to get, listen, I've had this book in my hands within the last 4 days, but if you are unfamiliar with Gordon Fee, there's so many things. He's written so many commentaries and all, but there's a book that's about this thick. So it's very, very readable, called, I'm almost positive I'm getting this, Listening to the Spirit in the Text. And he's just one of those theologians that he loves the scriptures. He doesn't just exegete in his commentaries. He gets full on in it. So if you want an 100%. Introduction to him, that is an amazing introduction.
Wonderful. Beth, what would you say to any women who may be wondering if the Lord is calling them to vocational Christian ministry?
One of the things that I would suggest, this was very, very important to me, and I've never, ever regretted it for a second. In a life of regrets, I've not regretted this. When God called me at 18, because there wasn't anything called me to. Like I had so many friends along the way that dudes that I knew really well that were called to preach. And then some friends that were called to the mission field. Well, I just was called. And so I thought, well, what to do? I had no idea what it would be. And so it was just like, follow me. And that, I to this day, it's how I live out my calling, what appears to be where he has me right now, and would I be prepared to do something entirely different? This way, if your role changes, say for instance you've been a pastor all of these years, suddenly that church for whatever reason splits in two, you end up you're working at Home Depot, you don't know what you're doing, you've lost your calling. Untrue, because you were called to follow Jesus. It keeps us from being positional in our definition of what it looks like to minister in the name of Christ. And so I would tell you that. I would tell you to go through the doors, to look. I'm about to say the cheesiest thing on earth, but I don't know, Leo, I don't know another way to tell you. I'll say this to the death. There are no new ways of walking with Christ. It's just the way of prayer, the way of mindfulness before him. As God said to Abram, walk before me. Walk before me. It's still going to be the spiritual disciplines of being with him, reading his word, trying to discern his will. Giving is a spiritual discipline. Those things, we have to give time to those things. But if you do, I've said to so many people, if you have half a wit to follow Jesus, you will not miss your calling if your life depends on it. I got to tell you one thing, because that still just blows my mind. I was on a podcast interview with a couple of brothers, wonderful brothers from a university. It was a Christian university, and they were out of college, so they were young leaders that headed up the college group there, and they were just wonderful. But they were really talking to me about the woman thing. It was in the thick of all of this, and he says to me toward the end of the podcast, he said, "What would you say?" He said, "We have a lot of women that are listening right now. How would you tell them to conduct themselves on campus as women with a calling?" I was just like floored. I said, well, I'd tell them to conduct themselves the same way I would tell the men to conduct themselves. And that would be with humility.
Good answer.
With humility. And without exploitation, as a servant and not someone to be served. That would be the mentality, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who did not consider equality with God as something to be grasped, but humbled himself and became a servant. So it was just such an odd thing. And I do think there are different things we bring to the mix, but we go out with the same mentality. I spent so much of my ministry apologizing for being a woman like God had done it accidentally.
Was it an accident that the first eyewitnesses to the empty tomb and to Jesus were women?
It must have been.
Yeah.
The men were in prayer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Ooh, next topic.
I'm sorry, Leo. This is
No.
when it falls apart. Right
No, the
at
end of the end of Jesus' life, it seems like the gospel writers are going out of their way, almost to where you're just in stitches over how weak the faith is of the men, the male disciples. It's the female disciples that seem to be there at the foot of the cross, at the empty tomb, meeting the resurrected Christ and then being sent out courageously. So anyway, we're going to have to close this time in just a few minutes. I want you to end by talking about a little bit about maybe your personal study and any recommendation to people who are interested in studying the Bible a little bit more. And this is my final quote because I love this. I think you were talking about reading Christian writers from different streams of Christianity. And you say this, it's profound. I was It was the hunt for Christ himself that fueled them. I'd spent my entire adult life looking for someone I'd already found.
I still love it. This morning, my Bible reading was out of Deuteronomy 8. And so God is telling through Moses what they can expect in the promised land. And so he tells them about all the grain they're going to find, the pomegranates, all the olive groves, all that they'll find. And he says, and you will mine copper from the hills. And it made my heart leap again this morning. And every time I've read it, I've thought the same thing. To me, it is the digging. I don't want my copper sitting on top of that hill. In my Bible study, what I love most of all is discovery. I want you to make me work for it. I want to have to work for it so that when it comes, when I see that Old Testament passage put together with that new one, that my heart leaps within me at the beauty and brilliance of the scriptures. So I love that. I love digging it out. I love the process of it. I love the work of it. I truly do. And I think that anybody that would give themselves the chance, I don't think that's anything he'd withhold from anyone who just really was like, I want to love it like it. I saw someone love it, and I began to ask God, give me that. I want to love it like that. And truly he did. He did. Mm-hmm.
Please show your appreciation for Beth Moore being with us today.
Y'all are so gracious. Thank you. Thank you. I've loved every minute, you guys. Thank you.
As I either told you or your daughter Melissa at the beginning of the morning, like, I am well aware you did not need to do this, like, at all. This was a huge gift for you to be with us, and I just want you to know that it means the world to me and to our staff and our church.
You need to know that the honor is mine, and I didn't even, the second we got the invitation, it was oh yes. So I've been very, very blessed. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Ellen.
I want to thank all of you for being here today. It means a lot to us at City Church. And I want to thank our team. Would you please show your appreciation for everyone who's spent so much time. Let me close our time in a brief prayer. Our Father, this has been just a pure joy for me personally, and I know for everyone who's been able to be here today. I thank you for Beth. I pray that you would continue to guard and protect her, that you would, even at this season of life, that you would cause her evermore to flourish. She is an extraordinary instrument of yours. Use her, Lord, and refresh her and her family. And I just praise you and give you thanks for them. Through Jesus Christ our Lord we pray. Amen.
Thank you.